Syrian air defense has responded to new Israeli raids near the capital Damascus. The Israeli military confirms it's attacked 12 targets in Syria, including both Syrian and Iranian facilities.
The IDF is striking numerous Syrian and Iranian military targets in Syria in response to Iranian aggression. More to follow.
Israel says the raid was in retaliation for its fighter jet being downed by the Syrian military. The jet crashed in northern Israel, with the pilots managing to eject. However, Damascus says that its air defenses hit the plane in response to a previous attack by Israeli forces. The perspectives of Syria and Israel on the situation differ in certain respects.
This morning, the Syrian Army Command issued a statement confirming that Syrian aerial defenses intercepted Israeli fighter jets that were carrying out an airstrike on a location in central parts of the country. And then later on, Sana news agency, the state news agency, said that Israel carried out subsequent airstrikes on locations west and south of the Syrian capital, Damascus, and also said that aerial defenses from the Syrian army have been intercepting these attacks. According to my sources, by 9:30 local timing, all airstrikes stopped. We can also confirm that the sites that were targeted in the earlier attack that took place on dawn today is the T4 air base in central Syria, in the deserts of central Syria near Palmyra. My military sources are saying that there has been no casualties, only 3 wounded soldiers in this dawn's attack, but there is no official confirmation so far. And the positions that were hit today in the subsequent attacks are in the Mas area west of Damascus and in Kiswe area south of Damascus. Kiswe has been hit before by Israeli airstrikes earlier this year, and back then Israel said that it hit what it believed to be a gathering of Iranian advisors in the command building of the Syrian Army's 1st Armored Division.
Well, it's a play in 3 acts. It all started with an Iranian drone, a remotely piloted vehicle, which entered Israel proper. We don't know yet whether for surveillance or attack, and it was shot down by an Israeli armed Apache helicopter. Now, following that particular incident, the Israeli Air Force has retaliated against the launcher of this particular drone, hitting the command and control vehicle and perhaps the launcher itself. And during this attack, one of the Israeli F-16s was either hit by Syrian ground defenses, or the pilots got the impression that they are about to be hit and bailed out. So Israel has lost 1 F-16, and following that, Israel has again retaliated, hitting the 12 targets, several of them being Iranian and several Syrian. This is the most serious incident between Israel and Syria, and definitely between Israel and Iran in many years. Perhaps in 10 or 15 years, we have not seen the like of it.
Let's cross live to Jerusalem now to discuss this with Max Blumenthal, author and senior editor at TheRealNews.com. Mr. Blumenthal, welcome to the programme. It's good to see you. You're in Jerusalem right now. Can you tell us what the situation is like there, what the feeling is in the city, and have you heard anything? Have you felt anything?
Yeah, right now in Tel Aviv, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman are meeting with Army Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot and the entire Army Command at the Defense Ministry. This meeting has been going on since the morning. No one has come out. Netanyahu has muzzled his cabinet ministers, and at the same time, it's been reported that Netanyahu has gotten on the phone with his American and Russian counterparts in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. Netanyahu seems to have every intention of not escalating, which is very significant for a number of reasons. And when he muzzles his cabinet ministers, that usually means that he doesn't want anything to come out in the Israeli press, which could trigger further escalation. This is being covered constantly by the Israeli news, and it's all the country is talking about right now.
How serious is this incident, in your opinion?
It's a dramatic incident for a number of reasons. First of all, this is the first Israeli plane that Syria has downed since 1982. Second of all, Israel is unable to escalate for a number of reasons. Benjamin Netanyahu was in the opposition when the Israeli government attacked southern Lebanon and lost to Hezbollah in 2006, and he fears another escalation in which Hezbollah is substantially stronger after the experience it's gained on the Syrian battlefield, and the Syrian army has gained advanced Russian air defenses, the S-200, for example, which appears to have downed this F-16. So Israel is in a tight bind here, and they have blamed this entire incident on Iran and consider it an attack on Israeli sovereignty, which is actually, frankly, bizarre, because the Israeli military struck 12 targets inside Syria, not Israel, and the Golan Heights is considered under international law Syrian territory.
Iranian targets were also hit in this incident. What kind of response, if any, do you expect from Tehran?
You know, it's unclear to me if Iran is really calling the shots here. I mean, this appears to be the Syrian government, after losing something like 100 soldiers, either from its own regulars or a allied militia, to American airstrikes, has decided that it's had enough with these infringements on its sovereignty and that it will strike back. It appears to be striking back with advanced Russian anti-aircraft missiles. And another significant instance here, or angle here, is that Israel has had to be very precise in responding to what it calls an Iranian drone, because Russian military assets are honeycombed across Syrian air bases, the very air bases Israel attacks, and Israel's afraid to strike any Russian targets. So again, this is a difficult moment for Benjamin Netanyahu, and we also have to keep in mind the domestic circumstances. Netanyahu is facing police recommendations for his own indictment for corruption charges. There are going to be massive protests against Netanyahu tonight in Tel Aviv, and many of those protesters are insisting, somewhat conspiratorially, that Netanyahu is seeking an escalation to distract from his own corruption problems and domestic plight.
We're already seeing an escalating situation in the north of Syria. How high do you think is the risk of further escalation in southern Syria? I mean, do you expect further attacks to happen?
I mean, we saw last year a lot of action in southern Syria around Kalamoun. There was pretty strong evidence that Syrian rebel insurgents connected to al-Qaeda were actually coordinating attacks with Israel, where they would fire a mortar into the Golan Heights or into Israeli territory to give Israel the pretext to attack the Syrian army. But I think we're going to have to reevaluate our entire analysis of what happens along the Syrian and Israeli border, because the fact that Syria has demonstrated deterrent capacity against Israeli jets today and its willingness to take them down, and because of the fact that Netanyahu is demonstrating his lack of interest in escalating.
And a Fox News alert is the Israelis now saying that today's attack on Syrian air defenses were the most significant strikes by the Israeli Air Force since 1982, already Saturday night in Israel as this is coming out. Those strikes came during a tit-for-tat as a drone flew from Syria into Israel. Waleed Faris, Fox News national security and foreign policy analyst, joins us now. We've got an Iranian drone flown into Israeli airspace. We have got Israeli airstrikes and then Russian-made anti-aircraft weapons fired on an Israeli jet. The Israeli jet crashed. And we've got massive Israeli military strikes now. We can have a war?
It is a war already, and it has to be stopped. And the reason is that the Iranians are taking the lead. The Russians are very nervous about that. They have an understanding with the Israelis undeclared that the Russians operate in the north, the Israelis operate in the south. But the Iranians are in between. And them sending those drones over Israel is suspicious, because the first time for years the Iranians would dare do this. And I have a potential explanation. The border between Iraq and Syria is now open. There is this highway between Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon.
Just so our viewers know, this is video that came in from northern Israel where that Israeli military jet, it was an F-16, crashed on its way back from a strike inside Syria. Both pilots ejected and are expected to live. One's pretty seriously hurt. But clearly, Waleed, as we talk, the Israelis are sort of overlooking Syria on this and holding the Iranians responsible.
Yes, because the Assad regime is so small in size now in terms of control of land. You have either the Russians backing that regime or the Iranian controlling most of the areas of the regime control. So yes, the Israelis are talking to the Iranians in these terms and telling them, if you continue, we're going to strike against your own forces in Syria.
Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militant group, arguably really an extension of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, saying this now changes their calculus. What does that mean? Is it an empty threat or one the Israelis should take seriously?
No, definitely seriously. I mean, Hezbollah can mobilize across the southern border of Lebanon, as you know, into northern Israel. It all depends really not on Hezbollah. It depends on what is the Iranian plan. Why are they so active now? What are they protecting in Syria? It seems to be that some experts are saying there's a possibility, Leland, that the Iranians are thinking of moving missiles to Syria. And they are telling the Israelis you cannot hit those missiles.
Well, telling the Israelis you can't hit something hasn't really worked in the past. Israel has shown a willingness and publicly said if there is game-changing weaponry being moved into Syria, we're going to hit it. They've done it in the past. Would they again?
What has changed is that the Iranians now are able to bring those missiles across the land into Syria, something that did not happen before. And the Israelis were more comfortable hitting against Syrian or Hezbollah targets. Now you have the Iranians bringing those weapons, and you have, as you just mentioned, the Russians present with their own missiles. So that is a lot of food for thought for the Israelis and their allies, the United States.
Well, clearly the Israelis did not hesitate today. Responding pretty strongly. And now with those air defenses taken out, have a little bit more leeway to act. But as you point out, this sets up not a good and pretty combustible situation. Waleed, thanks very much. More on this later in the show.
Leland, let me give you a little sense of the chronology here. This incident happened about 4 a.m. local time. That's when an Iranian drone, the Israelis say, crossed the northern border from Syria. They say this was a surveillance drone. The drone infiltrated Israeli airspace for about 1 minute before an Israeli Apache helicopter shot it out of the sky. Israel released video that it says shows the incident. An Israeli military spokesman accused Iran of, quoting now, playing with fire. The spokesman says the drone was recovered and that there is no doubt that it is Iranian. Iran would not confirm the Israeli claim. An Iranian foreign ministry spokesman called it, quoting now, ridiculous. Syria, meanwhile, says the drone was being used to combat ISIS. Israel has, as you know, in the past, shot down drones that crossed the border from Syria, but this is the first time, Leland, that it has resulted in such retaliation. We are now, as you mentioned, waiting to hear from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel has already said that it is going to go to the Security Council and asked for the Council to condemn what it sees as this Iranian provocation.
Yeah, and not the first time the Israelis have hit targets inside Syria when they thought the Iranians were moving weapons around. The first time, though, that Israel has ever lost a fighter jet in the process. Take us through that.
That's right, Leland. We do know now that an F-16 was downed during what essentially was a series of airstrikes that took place in Syria, apparently now in retaliation for the drone entering Israeli airspace. Hours after the drone infiltrated, Israel targeted the drone's mobile launcher, as well as Syrian and Iranian air defense batteries. Local media reporting tonight that also hit were Syrian radar facilities. Israel says that one of its aircraft, or that many of its aircraft, in fact, met with what they describe as massive anti-aircraft fire. One of those aircraft, an F-16, crash-landed on the Israel side of the border. Its 2 pilots ejected, one of them seriously wounded. And as you mentioned, this appears to be the first time that an Israeli aircraft was shot down since 1982 during the First Lebanon War. Syrian officials are claiming that its air defense batteries hit other Israeli aircraft. And as you might expect, tensions tonight extremely high. Russia, which has troops in Syria, is calling for the two sides to de-escalate the situation. But right now, Leland, nerves are very much frayed.
Yeah, very much afraid as that population waits to hear from their prime minister. Back to Jerusalem as Benjamin Netanyahu speaks. David Lee Miller, thanks so much.
ילד, זה מסוק שהתרסק.